Now, please pay attention, write notes. I'm chapter 11. I already finished chapter 10. We're on chapter 11. This is real estate contract. It's worth 12 points. Okay. You need to remember that consideration is an essential element of a contract. Consideration is an essential element of a contract. If I promise you money's in the future, is that still considered consideration? Yes. A post-dated check is money offered where? Today or in the future? It's in the future. Therefore, it is still considered what? Consideration. And consideration is what? An essential element of a contract. Now, to create a valid real estate contract, you must have offer and acceptance, and it must be communicated to each party. Whenever we talk about statute of fraud basically means that it must be in writing. You're selling real estate, must be in writing. You're leasing a piece of property, must be in writing. You give somebody the option to buy, must be in writing. There are two exceptions. The first exception relates, the first thing you have to do is either give some money or pay it off in full. The first exception would then be you giving possession to the property. If you do that and I've given you some money or paid it in full, you have to do what? Sell me the property. The second exception, same concept. I gave you some money or I paid it in full, and guess what's going to happen then? I make modifications to the property. I put a pool inside in the backyard. Guess what? You're stuck. You have to sell me the property. Those are the only two exceptions. The way we do real estate, we do what? Everything's done in writing, people. So always remember, statute of fraud relates to the transfer or the sale of real estate, and it must be done in what? Writing. Statute of limitation is something different. Under statute of limitation, what we're saying is this is a time period in which you can bring legal action. If it's an oral contract, 4 years. If it's a written contract, 5 years. So you have to know the difference between statute of fraud and statute of limitation. An implied contract is something that's based on something that's been inferred. What I mean by that is you did something, you made me believe there was something more. It was not really clear, it was not understood, and therefore I'm assuming it's part of the contract. That's called inferred. And it's implied. Okay. A void contract is a contract that cannot be performed under the law. A void contract is a contract that cannot be performed under the law. A voidable contract is one where one person is bound to the contract, but the other person can do what? They have a loophole. What would be an example? A minor. A minor can disaffirm the debt on their legal birthday, 18 years of age in some states. They can disaffirm the debt, saying that they were a child during the period this was entered, and they no longer want to be bound by it. Okay? In some states, the disaffirming could be 19. In some states, it could be 21. You don't need to know the number of age, but you just need to understand they can disaffirm the debt. Okay? Now, ways to terminate an offer. Ways to terminate an offer, we have a mnemonic called wild card. You need to go back and look at it. But I had you write something. I said you could not terminate an offer with what? Novation. You could not terminate an offer with novation. So, I had you write not novation. If anytime you see the word not, that's going to mean it's going to be an except for question. So they'll tell you how can you terminate an offer, and you'll say what? not novation. Okay. A buyer and seller, they have a dispute. How can they handle it? Well, they can sue each other, right? They can sue each other for cancellation, performance, all that stuff. But can a buyer and seller go to the Florida Recovery Fund for something that relates to them? No. That's a civil matter. They can't go to the Florida Recovery Fund. That won't work, okay? So they cannot go to the Florida Recovery Fund when there is a civil dispute between the buyer and seller. Okay. We talked about assignment. We can assign a lease. That means you permanently transfer something to someone, right? Your rights to use. Can we assign a contract? Sure we can. As long as it's permissible, we can give the contract away, we can sell the contract, we can warehouse the contract. But here's my question. When you assign something, you gave it away permanently, but does that relieve you from any financial obligation? No, it doesn't. You could technically end up doing what? Being held responsible to perform. Okay? So whenever they talk about transferring your rights to another person, they're talking about what? Assignment. Okay? Escrow money. Whenever you have escrow money, if the buyer defaults, that becomes what? It becomes the seller's, but what is it called? It's got a special term. I've been saying it all along. It's called liquidated damages. Whenever the seller can keep the escrow money, that's because it's liquidated damages. It's usually the buyer that sues for unliquidated damages because it's things that are not in the contract. Liquidated damages is the amount of escrow that's already listed in the what? Contract. If you sue for specific performance, you're suing because you want to have the what? Property. Okay? Seller changes their mind, you sue them, guess what? They got to sell you the property. And the person that sues for specific performance is usually the what? The buyer or the seller? The buyer. By the way, can you cancel a contract by simply changing your mind?
No.
No. No. No. That's backhand, right? No. You cannot, once you enter into a contract, you cannot back out of the contract by saying, I changed my mind, here's your money. If you do that, someone's going to sue you, and they're going to sue you for a specific performance. Okay? Now, let's talk about the as-is contract. Under the as-is contract, is the seller required to disclose anything that materially affects the value of the property?
Yes.
Yes. I've got to tell you, anything that materially affects the property. Okay? I cannot circumvent that. Now, let's talk about exclusive right. Please remember, with an exclusive right contract, you have the right to get paid. Under an exclusive right contract, you have the right to get paid. It is the only one that needs to be in writing. It is the only one where the the listing agent is guaranteed commission, regardless of who sells. Okay? If you have an exclusive listing, you need to remember that the seller still reserves the right to do what? Sell the property. That's why I want you to remember, if you see exclusive right, you have the right to get paid. Okay? Both of those types of listing agreements, you can put them on the MLS. The only one that requires to be in writing is the exclusive right. Okay? Yes. What? Exclusive right? MLS? Multiple listing service. That's like that's the system that we use to put everything in. Okay? Now, you need to remember what an option contract is. An option contract is when you give somebody the right to buy your property at a fixed price during a specific period, okay? That needs to be in writing. It falls under the statute of fraud. You need to remember that a contract deed is an installment sale, okay? The seller retains title. The buyer has possession of the property, but they will receive the deed when they do what? Pay it in full. Okay, chapter 12. You need to remember what a promissory note is. A promissory note is an IOU. It details exactly what you owe. So it'll give you the loan amount, it'll give you the interest rate, it will give you the term, how many years, and it'll give you an amortization schedule. Okay. In Florida, Florida's a lien theory state. When do you own your property?
Right away.
On closing. On the day of closing, you own your property. You get both title and possession. The only thing that your title has a what? Lien on it. Okay. You have to know who a mortgager is and a mortgagee. Best way to remember that is mortgagee is never me, because you're the mortgagor. Right? Mortgagee is never me, you're the mortgagor. You're the borrower. Okay. When you pay your loan in full, they need to send you something called a letter of satisfaction. When you pay your mortgage in full, they send you a letter of satisfaction. It needs to be recorded to offset the lien. The letter of satisfaction sometimes is called the satisfaction of mortgage. It's interchangeable, means the same thing. What's wrong, Sylvia? You good? Okay.
What is the letter for?
What's the letter? The letter basically says that you paid off the loan. Okay, so watch this. When you take out a mortgage, they record it in public records. So you bought a house, $500,000. 30 years later, guess what it says on public record? You owe $500,000. Huh? So when they send you that letter, it's going to say you paid it in full. You go down to the county clerk's office, you record it, and so what they're going to show is that there's a loan for $500, and there's going to show that you paid it in full. What do you owe on the house? Nothing. Okay? That's called constructive notice. Remember, when you record something, that's called constructive notice. It's the best evidence, right? You need to remember what a defeasance clause is. I'd go back and look at that.
Which one?
Defeasance. D-E-F-E-A-S-A-N-C-E. The defeasance clause is the one that the bank does what? It acknowledges that you're making payments. You need to remember what an escalator clause is. The escalator clause allows the bank to do what? Shoot up the interest rate. You need to remember that an exculpatory clause is the type of clause in which the bank cannot go after you should you sell the house through foreclosure and it's upside down. There's a shortfall. A defeasance, exculpatory clause is a non-recourse loan. Non-recourse loan. That means they can't go after you for any deficiencies. Okay? Now, effective yield. Everybody listen to me. When we talk about effective yield, is that always higher than the loan rate? Yes. The formula for effective yield is this. Please write this down. The formula. Loan rate plus number of points equals effective yield. Loan rate plus number of points equal effective yield. So let's do this one time. 1 point is 1/8. 2 points is 2/8, which turns into 1/4. 3 points is 3/8. 4 points is 4/8, which turns into what? 1/2. 5/8 is 5 points is 5/8. 6 points is 6/8, which turns into what? 3/4, right? If you got 7 points, that's 7/8. If you have 8 points, that's 1%. All you have to do is take the loan rate and add the number of points, you will get the effective yield. And that number will always be higher than the loan rate. Okay? Now, you need to remember what the Equal Credit Opportunity Act is. Under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, I cannot discriminate based on race, age, religion, sex, marital status, or nationality. I cannot deny you credit because of your race, your age, religion, sex, marital status, or nationality. Now, whenever I'm doing loan underwriting, can I deny you a loan because I don't like the racial or economic conditions of your area?
No.
No, what's that called?
Red line.
That's called redlining. Okay? So, with mortgage underwriting, there is no redlining. I cannot say I don't want to lend you money because I don't like the composition of your area. The homes are too old. I don't like, there's blue Chinese Cubans living there. Okay? That's racial. I can't do that, right? What's the FHA ratios? 31-43. What's the conventional ratio? 28-36. What's the VA ratio? 0-41. You have to know those ratios. I'd rather you know more. What's wrong? We didn't get it?
No.
28-36 conventional. 31-43 FHA. 0-41 VA. Now, what's the housing expense ratio? Bless you. If you have to do the formula, you have to take the principal, interest, taxes, insurance divided by gross monthly income. So it's PITI divided by GMI. If they ask you for total obligation, it's PITI plus all debt divided by GMI. Okay? Florida has something called equity redemption. Now, let me explain how equity redemption works. Your house is up for auction. The judge has foreclosed, they've issued a sale date, and your house is going to go for auction. Under equity redemption, you can actually show up to the court on the day of the auction and physically pay it off. You have to do it before the gavel strikes. If the gavel strikes and they say sold, you're dead in the water. Okay? That's Florida law. Now, you also have on your mortgages the right to reinstate. You have the right to reinstate before you have foreclosure. So technically, you could catch up with all your loan, your past due bills, any legal fees, and accrued and penalty. Any accrued interest, additional accelerated interest, and any of penalties. If you do that and you make the payment, you have the right to resume your loan under the normal conditions. Okay? Now, let's go to the next one. If for some reason there is a surplus, when they sell your house in an auction, who gets the money?
Me.
Who's you?
Me, mortgagee, the owner,
You, me, who, how?
the
Where?
mortgagee.
Who's on first, who's on second, what's on second, and where's on third, right? Okay. If there's a surplus, the owner of the house gets the surplus. Who's the owner? Mortgagee or mortgagor? Mortgagor. Okay? Chapter 13. Okay, you need to remember that an FHA loan is insured. FHA loans are insured and they have maximum loan amounts based on geographical areas. you need to remember that both FHA loans and VA loans do not have any prepayment penalties. So you can actually pay those loans off and not have a prepayment penalty.
What was the FHA one?
FHA and VA.
VA.
To qualify for an FHA loan, you need an honorable discharge, you need a certificate of eligibility.
No, VA.
I say VA, sorry, for VA loan. Sorry, for VA loan, you need an honorable discharge, a certificate of eligibility, right? And you need to live in the house. It needs to be owner occupied. Okay. Do I need to have a service disability?
No.
That's it. The only requirements I need is I need an honorable discharge, I need a certificate of eligibility, and I need to live in a property. You need to remember, VA loans are guaranteed. VA loans are guaranteed, and there's no maximum loan amount. Okay. PMI is only for conventional loans. PMI is only for conventional loans. Okay? And you have to have an LTV greater than 80%. The Federal Reserve has 3 tools that it could use to control money, the supply of money. The first one is the what? Reserve requirement. They can increase it, decrease it. That's the most abrupt, right? They can change the discount rate. That's the least effective. And they can participate in what's called open market operation. That's the most effective and direct method of the 3.
Open market what?
Open market operation is the most effective and direct. Life insurance companies have large predictable cash. Life insurance companies have large predictable cash, and they fund big projects such as apartment building, shopping centers, etc., etc. Okay? All right, who's in the secondary market? Write down secondary market. I want you to write Ginnie Mae. Write down Ginnie Mae, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae. If you were asked a question, something like this, all of the following are in the primary market except for, if you see Ginnie Mae, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, are they primary market?
No.
If they ask you a question, all of the following are in the secondary market except for, you need to look for Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae. The last one is the one that doesn't belong, right? Okay, moving on. If for some reason there is a change in interest rate, it's greater than 1%, so it's a 1% change in interest rate, that will be a violation of what's called the Truth in Lending Act. If there's a change, if there's any change that's unreasonable, when you go to closing, that will be a violation of the Truth in Lending Act. Okay? When I inform people about the true cost of lending, we're talking about what? Housing disclosures or RESPA? If I inform you about what the true closing costs are, is that a RESPA disclosure or is that housing disclosure? That's RESPA. Anything that relates to financing with the purchase of a house is all RESPA. Under RESPA, I need to give you both the dollar and the percentage of the true cost of what? Buying the house. Okay? Under RESPA, should you see any items related to housing disclosures, such as rate on gas, lead-based paint, Yes or no?
No.
No. You will never see any housing disclosures under RESPA. Put a star next to that. You will not see any housing disclosures next to RESPA. There is no radon gas, there is no FERPTA, there is no lead-based paint, there's no tax issues. That all relates to purchasing the house. Has nothing to do with financing. Okay. Chapter 14. 14. Okay. A binder deposit is a single line entry. It is a credit to the buyer. Okay, a binder deposit is a single line entry. It is a credit to the buyer. Title insurance is never what? Prorated. It is a one-time premium, usually paid where? At closing. And typically paid by the buyer. Okay. Just for argument's sake. You buy a rental property. Who gets the debit? Who gets the credit?
Repeat, what was the question?
You buy a rental property. I gave you these rules over a week ago. You buy a rental property. Who gets the debit? Who gets the credit?
Debit goes to the seller.
There you go. Debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. If you don't remember this, write it down now. You are very too late. This test is happening on Sunday without me in the room. Okay? It is debit to seller, credit to buyer. Always. You need to remember day of closing. If it belongs to the buyer physically owns it on the day of closing. So start counting from that day. Right? If it's day of the seller owns it up to that day, even on the day. Let's say it's the 15th, they own it on the 15th. Okay? Then the buyer gets 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Whenever we do house, it's 30 days. Let's do taxes now. Taxes is 365 days. Okay? Now, taxes is paid in arrears. My rule was very clear. If the house sells before November 1st, it's debit to who?
Seller.
Debit seller. The seller, the first time you can pay the taxes is in November. The seller lives in the house. It's September. They haven't paid from January all the way through. So, once again, if the house sells before November 1st, debit the seller, credit the buyer. Okay? Rule 2. If the house sells on November 1st or after, and the taxes have been paid, you're going to give a credit to the seller and a debit to the buyer. Everybody good with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you got no debits, credits, man. I can't help you there. Bottom line. I did this last week, and we covered it. So this weekend, you should have gone through debits, credits. Believe it or not, that closing statement is usually where people fell on the state. If you get past this class, make sure you do what? Study it. Okay? Expenses are always a what? Debit or a credit? I want you to put expenses equal debit. Always. Never a credit. Okay. At a closing, the seller must bring merchantable title. So, merchantable title is done in one of two ways. It's an abstract accompanied with an attorney's opinion or title insurance. All the seller has to do is bring merchantable title. It will do so by either bringing an abstract accompanied with an attorney's opinion, which is not guaranteed, or delivering title insurance. Okay? You need to know who pays the state documentary stamp tax on the note. Who pays that? The buyer or the seller? The seller. Now, I gave you rules the other day. Whenever you get a loan, it's a brand new loan, how many taxes do you pay? 2. If you get a new loan, you pay 2 taxes. The first tax is the intangible tax. The second tax is the stamp tax on the document. I'm so dead in water now. It's the state documentary stamp tax on the note. You pay 2 taxes. Okay? If you assume a loan, you pay 1 tax, and that's the state documentary stamp tax on the note. Now, let's talk about units for a minute. When you pay stamp tax on a deed or you pay stamp tax on a promissory note, you have to convert to units. If the units have a decimal place, what do? Round up, never down. Because stamp tax on the deed and stamp tax on the note are physical stamps. They refer to them as units. You cannot buy a decimal of a stamp. You need a whole stamp. That's why they're called units. You need to remember the formulas. Stamp tax on the deed is paid by the buyer. The intangible tax is paid by, stamp tax on the deed is paid by the seller. Stamp tax on the promissory note is paid by the buyer. And the intangible tax is paid by the buyer. You need to remember, intangible tax is only for what types of loans? New, never assumed. Intangible taxes are always on new loans, nothing that's been assumed. Chapter 16. Chapter 16. Chapter 16. Price refers to the amount received in a transaction. Price is the amount received in a transaction. It is the dollar the buyer is willing to pay, and is the dollar amount the seller is willing to what? Receive. Liquidation value refers to a failing business. Liquidation value refers to a failing business. Market value is the most probable price someone will pay.